I've escorted a few criminals in my time on the force, ranging from petty thefts to drunks and all the way to an attempted murder suspect. What I learned is there are really only two types of people: the ones who are quiet in the back of the car, and the ones who make noise. If you make noise in the back of the cop car, you may as well just sign a confession. We have a saying for this on the force: only guilty dogs bark, and it holds truer than you'd imagine. But the ones who are quiet are a completely different story. More often than not they're innocent, but sometimes, just sometimes, they're the most dangerous people of all. I snuck a glance into the rear view mirror and saw the old man sitting there, hands folded on his lap, looking out the side window at the houses as we made our way to the station. He had come peacefully and almost willingly, not that I expected a struggle, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with that first interaction. After the initial uncomfortable silence between the two of us, he asked if I was the one investigating the death of the Abian fellow. I told him I was, and asked if he knew the man. He told me he only met him briefly, but they have been in contact since. After that, I asked him if he'd like to come to the station to answer some questions. He obliged, and here we are. But the way he looked at that journal, and the way his eyes widened when he saw my nameplate, I shook my head. I know I must be imagining things. Maybe it's the shitty night of sleep I got, but it felt like my instincts weren't as sharp as they usually are. Eventually we reached the police station, and I walked him past reception, through the cubicles smelling faintly of Bill's burnt coffee, and into an interrogation room, where we'd be able to speak in private. If you could just take a seat here. I pulled a chair back for him from one side of the table as I maneuvered over to the other. Much obliged, sir, he said as he sat down, letting out a small sigh as he sort of plopped the last few inches into the seat. He must be older than he looks. I took my seat at the other side of the table and set the journal down off to my right. I took out a pen and my notepad and flipped to a clean page. All right, let's start with your name, and something to corroborate it, of course. Driver's license if you have one. Sure thing, he said as he reached into his back pocket to pry out his wallet. The name's Eli Jacobs. He slipped his driver's license out and slid it across the table to me. I began copying the information down onto my notepad. Great, thanks. And is this still your current address? Yes, sir, yes, it is. I looked back up at him as I was scribbling down the address. Natchez, Mississippi. You're a long way from home, partner. Yes, sir. Got me a nice little farmhouse there. I'm retired now, but I used to be the African history professor at Northwestern. After all those long cold winters and noisy city summers, the first decided I wanted to be somewhere warm and quiet, and well, Natchez it was. So, I said while tapping the butt of my pen onto the pad of paper, and sliding his license back over to him. Can't shoot the shit like this forever, huh? That we can't, he said, shifting so he could put away his wallet, his face showing no emotion. I felt the chills run up my neck. Let's start from the beginning. How did you know Thomas Ubyen? The old man took his hat off and sat on the table, and ran his hand over his white goatee. Then he pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose, folded his hands on the table and leaned in. I did as well. One day I get an email completely out of the blue. Came from this guy who said he had an ancient book, written in a near-dead language that he needed translated. Well, as one who's always curious, I responded and asked him to send over a sample of the text. Were you able to translate it? I asked. Hell, it was his lucky day because I may be one of 4 or 5 people left on this earth I know of who can. See, ancient African writing was close to hieroglyphics, not entirely like it, but similar. See, it used a combination of symbols for nouns, but written out words for dialogue and pretty much all else. To the untrained eye it's near impossible to distinguish what's a noun versus a character in a word, and this also makes writing out a dictionary a huge bother, that frankly 4 or 5 people, the second youngest of which you're talking to now I may add, simply don't have the time and resources to finish. That's pretty impressive, I finally responded after his long-winded reply. I learned Spanish in high school, but I've damn near forgot it all now. Picked up some Arabic while I was overseas, but even that's beginning to rust. Time and practice, that's the key to getting it fluent, he said, the first of which I've clearly got you outnumbered with. I chuckled a bit and leaned back, tapping my pen again. So let's fast forward. This bien fellow, you tell him you can translate it. Then what? Eli went on to tell me all about how bien was driving down from Massachusetts to Tarzan, and could stop over in Mississippi, that he looked like shit when he finally got to Eli's house. He said the book that he brought with him was incredibly old and valuable, but Abien wouldn't elaborate on how he came into possession of it. Apparently, he only wanted one small portion of text translated, and when he was done, he abruptly left, leaving the book with Eli. So I asked the obvious question, what did the text say? The part he wanted translated? Eli looked back at me and let out a deep sigh as he leaned back in his chair. He gripped his hat on the table and spun it gently on the smooth aluminum tabletop. Before I tell you this, I need you to promise me that you're not going to hold what I say against me. I raised my eyebrows. Well, that's hard to say, I returned. I can't promise you I won't hold it against you, but then again, we haven't been recording this little chat. Eli cracked a smile at the corners of his lips. Trust me, officer. No one is going to believe you anyway. I hate the expression, my blood ran cold. But damn if it isn't the only way to describe how what he said made me feel. I gathered my composure back and put my pen down. Spill it, I said. Thomas Abien wanted to know about a very old and very powerful witch doctor, one who lived thousands of years ago, he said, never dropping his gaze, never even blinking. This witch doctor performed a ritual and summoned an incredibly angry and vengeful spirit, one that infects the victim's dreams, renders him unable to sleep, and eventually, to take his own life. I frowned a little. Abien believed all this? Eli looked me square in the eye. Yes, and do you? He paused, closed his eyes, and let out a small yes. I leaned back in my chair. And let me guess, the reason this Abien guy looked like shit is because he hasn't been sleeping. Because he's being attacked by this sleep monster. Eli nodded. Well, shit, I said, closing my notepad. Could have been down at forensics checking out this guy's possessions, yet here I am wasting my fucking time talking to a loon. I pushed myself back from the table and stood up. I turned around and checked the clock on the wall. 4:30. Perfect. No way I'll be able to go through all this guy's shit before it's time to. Ubloo. My thoughts came to a crashing halt. I turned around and saw Eli, still sitting in the chair, hands folded on the table. What did you just say? Eli pushed his glasses back up his nose. You were the one who found him, weren't you? The first? The one I spoke to on the phone? I swallowed hard and nodded. You've heard that word before, haven't you? My voice was gone. The crashing halt of my thoughts spun through my brain like a tornado. The box, Danny, the interrogators, that word, Arab, right? Guy said it in my dream last night. Couldn't remember what it meant. I finally managed to push it out. But how did why? Not Arab, he said, standing up. African, specifically. He slowly walked around the table over to where I stood. I knew I should ask him to stop, but I was frozen in fear. It is short for Ubloo, which is a common phrase in that tongue. It roughly translates to wake up. I shook my head. You're fucking with me. I'm sorry you had to find out like this, officer. Back the fuck up, I said, my grip on my notepad tightening. The monster jumps from person to person by infecting whoever finds the previous victim's dead body first. I'm warning you, stop. Dr. Abien's patient was infected and he found him dead in his apartment, who found his father shortly after he had died, who found a dead tenant in the apartment he owned that hadn't been paying rent for a few months. I realized I was backpedaling, my heel hit the wall of the interrogation room. You found Dr. Abien in that old house, the house he came here to investigate that he learned of from one of the previous victims. You've heard that word only in your dreams. There's no way I could have known you'd understand it. I'm truly so very sorry for this, Jeff, but the monster, it's telling you to wake up. But, I stammered, trying to process so much at once. But why tell me to wake up? I'm sorry, I don't know, he said, eyes shifting to the floor. Thomas had a theory. You see, back in ancient Africa, whoever was afflicted would be assigned someone to wake them up if they began thrashing in their sleep. These people would shake the victim and yell Ubloo to wake them, let them know they're only dreaming. This, Thomas believed, the spirit picked up on, and still says to this day. But why? If it only has power in our dreams, why wake us up? That's the part he could never figure out. Eli sighed. There was a long pause between us, as Eli let everything sink in. So what now? I finally said. Well, I bought that book with me. If you'll allow it, I'd like to leave and run through it a few more times. Maybe there's something I've missed. In the meantime, you should flip through Abien's diary. It's likely that he's kept detailed notes on the whole ordeal and— No, I interrupted. Eli stopped speaking abruptly. I mean, what happens to me? Eli reached down and picked up his hat, returned it to his head, shifted the brim a little and then pushed his glasses back up his nose. Try not to fall asleep. It was now close to 8 o'clock at night, or maybe it was 9. I'd lost track, to be honest. I begrudgingly let Eli return to his hotel. After all, I had nothing to charge him with and couldn't really keep him here if I wanted to. We exchanged numbers and he told me he'd call if he learned anything, and that I should do the same, or if I had any questions. The pages of Thomas's diary were stiff from the ink that had settled into them. Page after page I turned carefully, reading slowly to be sure I took everything in. The man may have lost it at the end, but he was thorough, I'll give him that. His diary corroborated everything Eli had told me, in deeper detail. He even noted down his sleep schedule, how long he slept and how much time he feels he spent dreaming, trying to find a connection between the two to see if he could optimize his time spent asleep to dream the least. It was all very impressive, but it looks like he kept getting trouble from microsleep, instances where he wouldn't know he was sleeping until he woke up. Ubloo has learned a way to weave dreams into my life, seamlessly, so as to no longer rouse my suspicions. It understand that my fear is far greater when I can't tell I've fallen asleep. The Adderall may be able to keep me up for prolonged periods of time, but without REM sleep I'll continue experiencing microsleep. I feel like a dog chasing my tail. Either I give in and sleep for what by now will probably be over 24 hours, or continue pressing on, getting what little bit I can safely. It was all so horribly depressing. There were long paragraphs of theories that had been crossed off, notes in the margins explaining why he disproved them. I finally reached the end, and got the shivers as I read it. Arrived at the school, 2:31 a.m. No sign of activity in it from the outside. Can probably give myself no more than a half hour to search. Will report my findings later. I shut the notebook, put it down on my desk and took a sip of coffee, digesting everything. Jeff, my heart almost exploded. Fucking hell, Bill. I almost spilled this coffee all over my shirt. You shouldn't sneak up on people like that. I thought you always said I was too fat to be sneaky, he said, smirking. I frowned and looked at him. Fuck, he was right. He got me this time. Evidence has come back on your guy. It's downstairs in the locker if you want to go through it. My eyes widened. I'm gonna do that right now. Who's got the keys? Bill tossed them to me and started a slow victorious waddle back to his desk. I got up and practically ran to the evidence room. I fumbled with the keys a little, but eventually got the door open. The Abien box was on a bottom shelf. I squatted down and picked it up and brought it over to the table. There was a heavy duffel bag filled with burglary tools, a wallet, half-empty pill bottle, the bloody revolver. I started going through everything trying to make sense of it all. The pills he used to stay awake, wrote about those in his diary. Burglary tools were used to get into the church. That much made sense. Revolver must have been for protection, though it doesn't look like it did him much good. I continued to rummage around his bag until my hand brushed something that felt brittle. I stopped, gently grasped it and pulled it from the bag. It was a piece of paper, folded, ages old from the look of it. I unfolded the paper and read it aloud. I asked you how you sleep at night. Now I've got my answer. Mania Guthrie. My head started to spin. Abien mentioned in his diary that Eli had told him that the monster had been stalled. Long periods of time where there were no recorded deaths due to it, but somehow it always managed to return, without explanation. I read the note again one more time. Mania Guthrie. I said, shaking my head. Who the hell is this, and why did Abien have this note? Just then my phone rang. I pulled it from my pocket to see the picture of my wife staring back at me that I used for her caller ID. I answered. Hey, baby, what's up? Jeff, you need to get home, she yelled frantically.